On a blazing August morning in 216 BCE, under the harsh sun of southern Italy, 86,000 Roman soldiers marched with absolute confidence. Their bronze armor glittered like fire across the dusty plains near a small village called Cannae. Ahead of them waited a Carthaginian army barely half their size, led by a man whose name would soon echo through history, Hannibal Barca. By sunset, the fields would be buried beneath Roman corpses, and rivers would run red with their blood. What happened that day wasn't just a defeat, it was the single bloodiest day in the history of ancient warfare. This is the story of how one man's brilliance destroyed Rome's pride, and how tactical genius turned the mightiest army on earth into a trap of its own making. The disaster at Cannae began years earlier, with a vow. Hannibal was only a boy when his father, the legendary general Hannibal Barca, made him swear a sacred oath that he would never be a friend of Rome. That promise burned in him like fire. When he became commander, he carried that hatred across the frozen Alps, leading men, horses, and even elephants through blizzards and death. Half his army perished in the crossing, but those who survived were forged into iron. They were veterans from across the Mediterranean, Spanish swordsmen, Gallic warriors, African spearmen, and the lightning-fast Numidian cavalry. When Hannibal descended into Italy, he struck like a thunderbolt. At Trebia River, he lured Roman soldiers across icy water and slaughtered 20,000 of them in the freezing mud. At Lake Trasimene, he ambushed another army in the fog, killing 15,000 more in a single morning. For the first time in living memory, enemy banners fluttered within sight of Rome itself. Panic gripped the Republic. Farms burned, refugees flooded the roads, and the Senate was torn between fear and pride. Then came Quintus Fabius Maximus, the delayer, who proposed a cautious plan: avoid battle, wear Hannibal down, and strike when the time was right. But Rome's people despised caution. They wanted revenge. So in 216 BCE, the Senate raised the largest army in Roman history, 8 legions, more than 80,000 men, to crush Hannibal once and for all. 2 consuls were given joint command: Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a patient veteran, and Gaius Terentius Varro, an ambitious populist who promised victory. Their rivalry mirrored Rome's soul: discipline versus pride, strategy versus rage. When news came that Hannibal had seized the grain depots at Cannae, Varro demanded immediate battle. Rome's fate was sealed. As the Roman horde marched south under the burning sun, Hannibal was already waiting, not running, but watching. He had studied the land near Cannae like an artist studies his canvas. The open plains, the dusty wind that blew into Roman faces, the narrow space between river and hills, every detail was part of his masterpiece. When the armies finally met, the contrast was staggering. The Romans advanced in a massive block, their shields flashing like a sea of bronze. Across the field, Hannibal's smaller, more colorful army stood silent: Gauls in wild paint, Africans in captured Roman armor, Spaniards with curved swords, and the sleek Numidian horsemen ready to strike like shadows. The night before the battle, Roman camps buzzed with nervous confidence. Young recruits bragged of glory, the veterans cleaned their blades in silence. Across the field, Hannibal walked among his men, speaking to each in their own tongue, reminding the Gauls of Rome's oppression, the Spaniards of stolen lands, the Africans of gold and glory. Then, beneath a sky full of stars, he gathered his officers and revealed his audacious plan. A strategy so daring it bordered on insanity. He would let the Romans think they were winning. His weaker troops in the center would fall back slowly, luring the legions deeper and deeper into a pocket. Then his elite African infantry would strike from the sides, and his cavalry would sweep in from behind, sealing the trap. It was a move that demanded perfect timing, unbreakable discipline, and absolute trust, or death. Dawn broke hot and clear. Trumpets blared. Dust swirled in the rising heat. 80,000 Romans formed an unbroken wall of steel, packed so tightly that men could barely swing their swords. Facing them, Hannibal's crescent-shaped line waited, silent, patient, deadly. The clash began with the cavalry. On both flanks, Hannibal's horsemen thundered into the Roman riders. The Numidians darted in and out with deadly precision, while the Spanish cavalry smashed through the right flank like a storm. Then, with a command from Hannibal, the center advanced. The Gauls and Spaniards met the Roman front lines in a deafening roar of metal and flesh. The earth shook as 80,000 Romans surged forward, pushing hard, believing victory was close. Hannibal's center bent under pressure, step by step, just as he had planned. From the Roman viewpoint, the Carthaginian line was collapsing, but it was only curving, forming a deadly crescent that wrapped tighter and tighter around them. As the legions pressed in, they unknowingly trapped themselves. At the perfect moment, Hannibal unleashed his hidden strength. His African veterans on both wings pivoted inward, their spears glinting like fangs. At the same time, the Carthaginian cavalry, having annihilated Rome's horsemen, circled behind and crashed into the Roman rear. In seconds, Rome's vast army was surrounded. The hunters had become the hunted. What followed was not a battle but a slaughter. Trapped in suffocating heat and chaos, Roman soldiers were crushed together so tightly they could barely raise their weapons. Those in front were hacked down. Those behind could only push forward over bodies of the dead. The screams were endless. Dust and blood choked the air. Men drowned in the press of their comrades before ever seeing an enemy's face. By the time the sun began to set, 50,000 Romans were dead, cut down in a single afternoon. Only a handful escaped. The rest were butchered where they stood. The once invincible Roman legions had been erased by a smaller army, guided by the mind of a genius. When news of the massacre reached Rome, the city fell silent. There were no tears left to shed, only disbelief. In one day, Hannibal had destroyed the core of Rome's military might. Yet, incredibly, he did not march on the city. He knew Rome would rise again, stronger and more ruthless than before. Cannae became more than a battlefield. It became a lesson written in blood. Hannibal's double envelopment would be studied by generals for over 2,000 years, from Napoleon to modern warfare academies, as the ultimate example of tactical brilliance. And though Rome eventually recovered and crushed Carthage, it never forgot that one August morning when its pride led it to ruin. Because on that day, under the blazing Italian sun, one man taught the world that strategy, not strength, decides the fate of empires.